If we live by that song, we'll find a heavenly home. First question. Toby, am I loud enough back there? Very good. If I'm not, please let me know. Second question, do we have anybody here who's been in this Sunday night class for the first time? If you would, just kind of raise your hand. One, any more? Okay. I won't go back into the whole thing, just simply to say this is a generic series that could probably be taught in any one of the congregations of the Lord's churches anywhere in America. So when I'm talking, please don't assume I'm talking about specifically Walter Hill. There's about 4 things I want to follow up with before we get started. Last week I talked about Charles Spurgeon, and I made the statement, he was an interesting guy. Had the Lord's Supper every Sunday. The preacher's preacher. Read about him sometime. He has a lot of quotes. He said he liked to go out in the lightning and thunder and rain and listen to his father talk. I thought that was an interesting comment. Anyway, last week I said I had hoped if more people had had a chance to talk to him, he would have been part of the, and I said Reformation, I meant to say restoration. If more people had talked to him, maybe he would have been part of the restoration. Number 2, shame on you. Last week, I'm sitting up here saying, now on your handouts you'll see, on your handouts you'll see, and I forgot to pass the handouts out, and not a one of you said anything and called my hand. So, I'm going to pass out last week's sheet again. If you want one, raise your hand. If you've already got one, fine. If you didn't get one, great. If you'd like to have another one because you didn't bring it, fine. Just raise your hand and we'll take care of it. Number 3, because I didn't pass a handout out last week, it messed me up. And that's not on you, that's on me. And if you look at the handout, I skipped over one of the topics I wanted to talk about, which is indifference. Number 4, if for whatever reason you're not a part of the Wednesday night Bible classes here at Walter Hill, I would like to encourage you to come to the auditorium class. It's being taught by Tim Nance. It's the book of Jeremiah, and it's a very good class, and Jeremiah has a lot to say that's applicable to us today. I think that's all my points, so let's get into it. We're going to start with indifference. Thank you, sir. Now, indifference has a cousin. Indifference's cousin is apathy. We all know what apathy is. I don't care. 2 examples. A spiritual couple visits another couple whose attendance is very sporadic. Let's just say they come every 6 weeks or so. It's not good for their souls. It's not good for the body. They're robbing themselves. They're robbing the other saints by not being involved. So a spiritual couple goes to see them and talk to them about their soul. And they thank them for coming over, but then say, thank you, but we don't care. That's apathy. One more real-world example. A dear preacher friend of mine shared with me that he and another man visited a man who was a member of the Lord's church, who was married, but he had moved out of his home and was shacking up with another woman. They went to talk to him about his soul and what was going on in his life. And he listened to him and he said this, I don't care if I go to hell. I love her and I'm going to stay with her. I would submit that's apathy, and it's also foolishness. Well, let's talk about indifference. You know what that is. I'm just too busy. Why, there's more people here at Walter Hill that have more time than I have. There's more people here at Walter Hill who are more qualified than I am. And, it'd be good if they did the work, not me. So what's the result? We put God on the back burner. He doesn't get the first fruits. He doesn't get the lamb without blemish. He gets the leftovers. And when that happens, guess what? The church suffers. In Matthew 25, there's the account of the person with one talent who buried the talent, and he was cast into outer darkness. When indifference is your style, you do not have to exert yourself to show you're sincere. That's a powerful statement. When indifference is your style, you don't have to try very hard to convince people you're insincere. How many hours are in a day? Well, let's think for a minute. 24, right? There's 24 hours in my day. There's 24 hours in your day. So everybody has 24 hours. It is a truth that people tend to gravitate towards what they like or maybe what they feel comfortable with. In the workplace, no matter how many assignments you have, and I've been retired for several years now, but I think this is true for all of us who've ever worked, we gravitate to what we like to do. We gravitate to what we're maybe more familiar with. At the end of the day, the things that we just don't necessarily want to do kind of get put on the back burner. Sadly, I think that's true in the Lord's church. But someday, each and every one of us will look back on our lives and will either have righteous pride, indifference, or disappointment. And it really doesn't matter at what stage we look back on. We can look back on the teenage years, young married, children leaving the nest, grandparents. We'll all look back and we'll either have righteous pride, indifference, or disappointment. Tonight will soon end, and tomorrow we all start out with a clean slate. We can put anything on that slate we want to put. Therefore, we should choose wisely. There's a song that Simon and Garfunkel sang. I think I actually put the words on the handout. It's been a while since I've actually looked at it. They read like this. Time it was, and what a time it was. It was a time of innocence, a time of confidences. Long ago it must have been. I have a photograph. Preserve your memories. They're all that's left you. Now, the visual image for me is an older person looking at photographs, remembering their life and what it used to be like. Qualifier, if the Lord grants life to everyone in this auditorium tonight, and we continue to age and get older and the Lord grants life, most likely we will all end up in assisted living, in a nursing home, in our home with family members or someone paid to care for us. If the Lord grants life, we all might have that kind of future. If the Lord grants life and we have that kind of future, we may not be able to be in worship services. The kids took the keys to the car away, or we realized we're no longer safe driving. So it's crucial, living in the kingdom and working in the kingdom, to preserve our memories now, which is to say, make memories, so that when we get to that point, we can look back on our lives and feel righteous pride versus disappointment. It's tempting, though, to let past mistakes convince us that it's too late, I've really messed up. There's nothing I can't get started. There's nothing I can do. But there's no time that's not the right time to be involved in the Lord's work. The next subject I want to talk about is immorality. This is infecting the church, by the way. To my knowledge, Walter Hill, from a sexual perspective, has been blessed. I ought to be careful, and then again, I have apathy. I don't care. I can tell you about a congregation where a lot of the younger marrieds, 25 to maybe 38, divorce, remarriage, divorce, remarriage, divorce, remarriage, cheating on spouse, cheating on spouse, cheating on spouse. True of members, true of deacons' children, true of elders' children. Well, let's look at immorality. You know what people say. I don't find anything wrong with it. Or what the young people might say. You know, everybody's doing it. Or maybe something like this. It's really not any big deal. You know, the Bible doesn't say anything negatively about this. The Bible doesn't say you can't do that. I want to read an article from Plain Talk by Robert F. Turner. It's a nice little piece. It gives us all, I think, something to think about. He starts out by saying this: has anyone seen a plain, old-fashioned sinner lately? They're getting mighty hard to find. If the prodigal son were living today, as if he were not, he wouldn't be a sinner. A juvenile delinquent, perhaps, but his parents would be to blame for that. They're no bad boys, you know. His wild oats are just youthful exuberance, a normal rebellion against unjust society. He must be free to act positively. There are no liars today. These fine people are simply extroverts with imaginative talents that should be properly challenged. They exhibit creative ability. Their instability is a facet of their capacity for free, uninhibited thought. They may become great poets, lawyers, or preachers. He didn't say politicians, I'll add that. The drunkard is really not a sinner. He has an inferiority complex, and he makes a mechanical adjustment, albeit a liquid one, to the problems of today. Besides that, he is sick. He beats his wife, starves his children, and is a scourge to society, so he needs our sympathetic understanding. Adultery may be a sin in some far-off slum district, but not amongst movie stars or popular public figures, and don't even mention the word when we get close to home. Here it is simply a case of biological maladjustment. The sex pervert was denied free discussion at home. His parents were old-fashioned and believed in common decency. His mistake is the fault of modern society. Maybe, just maybe, the murderer is a sinner. On the other hand, he may be the victim of some early traumatic experience. His mother was overprotective. He was greatly inhibited. He was never allowed to push his oats off the high chair. So now he pushes his wife off the Brooklyn Bridge, poor fellow. There may be an element of truth in all of these descriptions, but one element, very necessary for correction, is lacking. We are overlooking the moral element, end quote. You can clean it up. You can rename it, rebrand it, call it anything you want. You can publish a dictionary and totally change the meaning of the word, but sin is sin. And unrepented, with no path to walk away from that sin, is condemning and damning. Justin this morning talked about friendship. It's good to have friends, but the Bible says there's a type of friend we shouldn't have, and that's found on your outline, I hope, in James chapter 4, verse 4. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Now he's talking to Christian brothers and sisters, and when he calls them adulterers and adulteresses, that's pretty strong language. But what he's saying to them basically is this: You made a commitment to God. He will be faithful to you. You made a commitment to be faithful to him, and you are not being faithful to God. You are an adulterer and an adulteress. Now, the verse doesn't condemn having friends or being friendly with the world. What it condemns is the idea that we'll be friends with the world and we will seek to please the world and not please God. And note what it says. We can make ourselves an enemy of God just by being friends with people in the world? Yeah, that's what it says. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? We can make ourselves an enemy with God by accepting the sinful practices of the world and therefore endanger our lives. Last week we touched briefly on Romans chapter 1. It details in great definition the sin of homosexuality. By the way, it's a sin. I don't care what you call it anything you want. It is a sin. But the last couple of verses in Romans chapter 1 say this, in essence, paraphrasing. These people doing these things are sinning. However, if you're consenting to those things, you also are sinning. Friendship with the world is hostility towards God. And when we put that ahead of pleasing him, church, we have a problem. When we forget that he has to come first in everything we do, we'll find ourselves moving more and more into the world and less out of the kingdom. It needs to be said again, so let me say it. God's word does not change. Absolute truth never changes. Judgment begins at the house of God and then to the world. And judgment will be based solely on, exclusively and solely on God's word. James Nelson, here's the trigger. My next subject is worldliness. Thank you, sir. I made sure I had somebody that when I got to this subject was willing to pass things out. Where's Edward? If I can lean on you again, sir. Thank you very much. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines materialism as a preoccupation with or stress upon material rather than intellectual or spiritual things. At the outset, allow me to say it's not a sin to be wealthy. And by the same token, you don't have to be poor to get to heaven. But let's explore the subject of materialism. Exodus 20, verse 17 says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male servant or his female servant or his ox or his donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Covetousness is a sin that is talked about in the pages of the New Testament. Call it greed, but it's a sin. And my question is, that was some 2,000 years ago, is it likely that it ceased to be a problem just because it happened so long ago and it no longer happens today? Thank you, sir. Well, the answer is just because it happened 2,000 years ago doesn't mean it's not still happening, because it is, and it's one of the things talked about rather extensively in the pages of the New Testament. I would like us to look at a verse, 1 Corinthians 5:11, and let me say this. Covetousness is a specific sin that is listed as grounds for withdrawal of fellowship. We might say church discipline is a forgotten command, and generically speaking it is, but it's specifically mentioned as a withdrawal item. For example, it said, well, let's read it. "But actually I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person or covetous or an idolater or reviler or a drunkard or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one." Now we fully understand, I think, you don't want to be having fellowship with a brother who's a murderer, who's a cheat, who is an habitual liar, and they won't repent of any of these sins. But it says the person who is covetous is a person we're not supposed to associate with either. Let me make my point this way. Sometimes it's hard to know when you cross the line. For example, here's self-confidence and here's pride. Now, you need self-confidence. You need self-confidence in your job. You need self-confidence as a parent. I need self-confidence to be here before you to do what I'm doing tonight or trying to do tonight. But there's a fine line that you can very easily cross between self-confidence and pride. And sometimes it's hard to know you've crossed that line. Well, what about covetousness? One irony is this: it is hard to discover that in ourselves. It's not something that just pops right out. Shoot somebody, pops right out. Lie? Yeah, you know you're lying, unless you're a politician. Cheat somebody? Yeah, you know. But covet? For example, the car I'm driving is 20 years old. I know I'm going to need another car sometime. I'll be taking up a collection later on. I don't know what kind of car I want to get or what kind of car I can afford, but I know somewhere down the road I'm going to have to get another car. Now, when I see some of the cars over here in this parking lot that are new and shiny, and wow, that's nice, maybe that's the kind of car I want. I'm not coveting. I'm admiring, and I'm thinking about the fact that I got to replace my car sometime. What do I get? And that really looks nice. But I can cross the line. Build a new house. We come to see you at your new home. Wow, man, this is fantastic. Look at all the gadgets. Look at the size. It's just beautiful. I'm not coveting, but I can cross that line if I'm not careful. In an article on covetousness, Paul Keller wrote about the Roman priest that he had met with. And the Roman priest basically told him this: in all of my years of hearing the confessional, not one time has anybody ever confessed of covetousness. They've confessed about everything. I've heard them all. But not one person has ever confessed about the sin of covetousness. It's hard to realize that's within us. Luke 12:15 says, "Then he said to them, beware and be on guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." But what about materialism? In our quest for the American dream, we are chasing. We read magazines. We buy books. We listen to radio shows. We listen to TV shows. Maybe we go to a seminar, chasing the American dream. And let me say this, that can be good, but it can also be bad. Materialism is an attitude. It's an attitude that can infect us. And it's just as much a sin for the rich as it is for the poor. The rich may put their faith in their treasures more than in God, and they may neglect spiritual matters for material matters. And the poor, well, he may envy the rich, and he may go into debt head over heels to get what he wants. Ernie used to say, people who don't have money are buying things they don't need to impress people they don't really care about. Maybe there's some truth to that. Ecclesiastes 5:10 says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity." Several years before I retired, I literally wore people out with this question. Excuse me. If your house is paid for and you have major medical, how much money do you need to retire? The lowest answer I got was $250,000. And it was from Ray in Jacksonville, Florida. And he said, 10% interest, that's $25,000 a year. Put that with the other stuff, I'll be fine. Well, 10% interest is come and gone. You can't bank on that. The highest answer I ever got was from my cousin who's a dentist, and he said that I need $2 million, and he mentioned his wife's name, and he said, we're going to travel a lot. Bill Satterfield in North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, maybe had the best answer of all. He said this, it's not about how much you have, it's how much you owe. And if you don't owe a lot of money, you're in a whole lot better shape than people who owe money. Now, how much do we need? I was teaching an auditorium class, a different congregation one time, and Don Sharp made a statement which I thought was brilliant. He said, old people may have more money than they need because they don't know how much money they need. And that's certainly true. My mom spent 8 years at Stones River Manor. For the last 4 months of her life, we used Honey Hill. We paid Honey Hill, and they stayed with Mom 24/7. The sum total of all that was over $400,000. Old people may have more money than they need because they don't know how much they need. We've been very fortunate. Mom's house on Biltmore Drive in Nashville was on a street where they were tearing down all the houses and building 2 of the big houses. And I was able to sell Mom's house for a ridiculous amount of money, about $365,000. And that went against taking care of all of her needs. So in addition to Stones River Manor, we had the money for hair appointments, getting her fingernails cut and polished and whatever all that involves, above my pay grade. Snacks to eat, doctor's bills, dentist bills, on and on. My point is, you don't know how much you need, and maybe old people do have more than they need because they simply don't know how much they need. But I would love to get in front of some sports, actors, people of, quote, personality, and ask them, guys, gals, how much do you need? And by the way, how much is enough? I'm a New York Yankee fan, have been all my life. Aaron Judge is a phenomenal player. If you don't know anything about the Yankees, he is, plays center field, broke Babe Ruth's home run record. Now you say, well, a big deal. Barry Bonds did and Mark McGwire did. Yeah, but they did it with chemicals. He did it naturally. So if you look at his 9-year contract, and this doesn't include endorsements, commercials, speaking engagements, whatever. You look at his contract, he makes $40 million a year, $246,000.9 per game. If you look at a baseball season, not counting the World Series. Let me say that again, $246.9 thousand per game. A baseball game, if it doesn't go into extra innings, has 9 innings. He makes $27.9 thousand per inning. How much is enough? Dak Prescott is a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. He may be the highest paid, $65 million. That's $3.8 million per game. There's a football coach in Gatorland that the fans want him out, and he may well lose his job. The issue that the president and the athletic director, and if there's a board, the board faces is that if they boot him, they owe him over $20 million to buy out his contract. Now think about that. Here's a guy who, you're fired, here's $20 million, maybe they pay him over some installment plan, and you don't ever have to work again unless you really want to, because here's $20 million. You know the name Tom Cruise? He did 2 Top Gun movies. The second one just recently was called Top Gun Maverick. He worked out this kind of a deal. $13 million up front with a back-end deal that earned him over $100 million. How much is enough? As of July the 29th, 2024, the average public school teacher in Nashville, Tennessee earned $54,147 per year. Folks, we have our value system all out of whack. And greed is a sin. How much is enough? Leo Tolstoy, I'll get it right in a minute. Leo Tolstoy told this story. He was a Russian, so you'll hear the word rubles mentioned in the story. But he wrote about a successful peasant farmer who wasn't satisfied with his lot in life. He wanted more. I need more. I want more. So somebody came up to him and said, look, for 1,000 rubles, here's what we're going to give you. You can walk, and everywhere you walk, it will be your land. 1,000 rubles, you get it all. Walk wherever you want to walk. Here's the stipulation. You start the beginning of the day. You have to be back to the starting point by sundown, or you don't get it all. He was excited. And the next morning he got up. He starts on a very fast pace. By midday, he was getting tired, but he kept on going, covering more and more ground, because the more ground he covered, the more ground he could have. Into the afternoon, he got to thinking about it and said, my greed has overtaken my senses, and I might be in trouble. I got to get back to the starting point. So he picks up his pace, and the sun begins to sink into the sky. And now he's running, knowing if I don't get back to the starting point, all this land that's going to be mine will be gone. So he's running. As the sun begins to sink below the horizon, he can see the finish line where he started from. And if you need to go to partake of the Lord's Supper, it's just down the hall on the left. He picks up his pace. He's running furiously now. He's gasping for breath. His heart is pounding. And he calls on every ounce of strength he has to get to the starting point so he can have all that land. And he gets there. And he collapses. And blood is streaming from his mouth. And in a few minutes, he's dead. And his servants buried him. The plot was about 6 feet long and about 3 feet wide. Tolstoy's story was this: how much land does a man need? About 6 feet by 3 feet. Rich or poor, it is a sin to have excessive, selfish desires for money or material things. As a kid, I knew what a credit card was. I'd been in a car with a preacher and one other youth and some grown men, and the preacher kind of worked it out so that one of the men could buy gas when he needed to stop and buy gas. And the man said, put it on my credit card, that way I don't have to pay for it. Average credit card debt in America is $6,000. Now, that may mean somebody has $25,000 and somebody has $100, but debt, not paid every month, debt, over $6,000. There's an old saying that says, when a person's outgo exceeds his income, then his upkeep will be his downfall. When a person's outgo exceeds his income, then his upkeep will be his downfall. Some Christians are guilty of that. And there's no question that our government is. If the children of the Heavenly Father are loading up on debt to have things, to have pleasure, to have entertainment, that's a problem. I might go so far as to say it's a sin. On your sheet, Proverbs 30, verse 8. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty or riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, that I not be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God. Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. For I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity, and in any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That 13th verse is often really misunderstood. In the context, if I got money, I don't have money, I'm suffering or not money, it's not suffering, I can do all that through Christ who strengthens me. And then in the Revelation 3:17, because you say I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, and you do not know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. More about that when we talk about the letters to the 7 churches. Materialism. What are some of the damages it can do? Well, it can impact our character. Here's a godly person who all of a sudden feels the pull of wealth and materialism, and they slowly walk out of the kingdom into the world and chase wealth. It can destroy our family, the wife or the husband who works and works and works and never sees the other. And what about the children? They watch that happening. They very quickly get the message. It's all about money. Get all you can. It can hurt the Lord's work. Oh, giving may look good, but how much is anybody really sacrificing? And let me raise my hand and confess to you that I don't sacrifice as I could or as I should. And I wonder if there are many Christians at all who really sacrifice for the cause of the kingdom. This is not going to be a simple fix. This is not going to be an easy fix. But if the rush towards worldliness is not stopped, America is going to get deeper and deeper in sin, just like Sodom and Gomorrah. And guess what? The world's not going to slow it down. The world's not going to stop. Remember, we started out this topic with problems facing the church. And this is a problem, generically speaking, that God's people have today. We have our heads stuck in the sand if we don't realize that the culture we live in, the materialism that surrounds us, is negatively impacting the Lord's church and the Lord's work. What happens in the hereafter depends on what we're here after. Romans 12:2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. 1 Timothy 6:6. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we all have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If you have food and covering, with these you shall be content. Matthew 6:21. No, we'll start with 19. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I can do a little teaser on leadership, or I can pause. Questions or comments? And don't everybody speak at once. Questions or comments? Paul is a missionary, and he is a preacher in Michigan. And we've communicated a wee bit, and he sends out things. And one of the things he sent out was from a preacher in Texas. And I think I have time to share this with you. If you're an elder in the Lord's church, how do you prepare for the future when you have no idea what that future is? Let's see if I can get this in. This past Sunday afternoon, this is the preacher. We just completed a nice Sunday New Year's family dinner together. The phone rang. The person who called asked if the church had evening services, and I affirmed that we did at 5 o'clock. He also asked if we provided transportation to services, and I said we'd be glad to make arrangements. He also said, my name is, we'll say blank. It was a feminine name. Does your church allow transgender people to attend? Admittedly, I was caught off guard. My mind was racing. A flood of questions went through my mind, like, what should I say? Am I compromising anything if I say yes? How do I address this person? What will the church think? At any rate, around 1 second to process and respond, I said something to the effect, we allow everyone to come into the assembly. That seemed to be an acceptable answer, and no additional questions were asked regarding the matter. I did say I would call him back very soon to let him know about the arrangement details. I called him back and confirmed that I would pick him up around 4:35. Picking him up went without any problem, but he was fully dressed as a woman, wearing a dress, long hair, makeup, wearing the jewelry of a woman, but his face was unmistakably masculine along with his voice. There was no probing of my beliefs on any such subject, and I certainly never felt as if this was some sort of malicious test to how I would respond. Everything went well until we arrived at the church building. Several had been informed of the situation to alleviate some of the shock. When we arrived at the building, there was not too much time to spare, but afterwards members introduced themselves and talked to him before we left. During my sermon, I noticed him nodding his head in affirmation on at least a few different occasions. He was certainly intent in following the lesson and did not seem to be adverse to what I said. During the 2 13-minute trips with this individual, I was very nervous about them. There was no conversation about LGBT things, but I learned about the death of his mother, his father, his sister, and a very close friend. 2 of the 3 of these took place in the previous calendar year. The friend who died was really a good friend's daughter he had tried to help and get help for, who was addicted to crack cocaine. She was hit by a car and killed on I-35 last July in South Fort Worth. How do you handle something like that? How do you say, hey, we're prepared for anything and everything? And can you imagine if that happened at Walter Hill, what would the little children think? Would the teenagers laugh? Would they smirk? How do you prepare for the crazy world we live in, the sin-sick, sick world we live in, and what might walk into the doors or happen here at Walter Hill? It's certainly something for elders to think about. I'm not saying they haven't already. It's certainly something to do a brainstorming session about, because guess what? How do you know where we're going or what's going to happen? Saved by the bell. Thank you for being here. Next week, we will talk about leadership and maybe get into the beginning of the letter to the 7 churches. Thank you for being here.